Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. Today we're going to be talking about some really fun, wholesome holiday content today. We're going to be talking about the Santa Strangler. Some really cheerful little Christmas content for you guys. So back in the 1970s, there was a series of middle-aged women who were strangled to death in the harbor area of LA, and this case actually is solved. It took about 30 years to solve this case. It's pretty crazy the way that they solved it as well. You guys are gonna be shook. But before we get into it, I just want to thank today's sponsor, Casetify, for making this video possible. You guys know I'm obsessed with Casetify cases. I do not use any other cases on my phone, especially because I am such a klutz. I drop my phone multiple times a day, every single day, and I've always got my Casetify case on. So as you can see, not a scratch, thankfully, because they are approved for drops of up to 9.8 feet. They are made from 65% recycled and plant-based materials. They're 5G and wireless compatible. They are 100% non-toxic and non-hazardous, and they also have an antimicrobial coating, so they kill 99% of bacteria. And on top of all of that, they're obviously really cute cases. They have a ton of different designs. There is actually something for everyone, no matter what your style is, what your taste is. And they're also customizable, so you can add your initials, you can add a monogram, you can add somebody else's initials or monogram and get it for them as like a customizable gift or a personalized gift. And they also have these really cute bead straps, which are just the most fun accessories. They're made of acrylic and resin, so they are non-toxic and lead-free, and I just love matching them to my phone. Like, I feel like these look so cute together. So if you guys are interested in checking out anything from Casetify, the bead straps or the cases, make sure you head to casetify.com/Bella so you can get 15% off. And speaking of cases, let's go ahead and get into today's case. Alright, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. The first murder occurred on the 25th of December in 1972. Lois Petrie was 43 years old, and she had just recently lost her husband to cancer. And on Christmas Day, she went out to a bar in San Pedro for a drink. She had plans to have Christmas dinner with her family later that night, but unfortunately she would never make it. The next day, on the 26th of December, Lois's sister Erna went to her apartment to check on her because obviously she didn't show up to dinner the night before and nobody had heard from her. So she went to her apartment, and that is where she found her sister's partially naked body. Her cause of death was manual strangulation, and her killer had also sexually assaulted her, and his semen was found inside of her, which was collected for DNA evidence, but this was 1972, like DNA testing wasn't really a thing, it didn't really become a thing until, you know, the late 80s. So without any further leads, without any further evidence, the case kind of just went cold, which, you know, this case really got me thinking about how crazy it is that it would have been so much easier to get away with crimes back then because DNA testing wasn't a thing. It was way harder to solve crimes, and I guess that's why there was like such a big surgence of serial killers at the time. Anyway, so nothing really happens for the next couple of years until the 19th of August in 1974, so 2 years after Lois's murder, another body is found. The body of a 50-year-old woman is found at the Harbor Lake Recreational Park. She was found lying face down, and her body was found partially naked, and just like Lois, she had been raped and then strangled. Her body had been dragged from the nearby car park into the bushes where her body was dumped. For the next month, this woman actually became known as Jane Doe 52 because it took police about a month to identify her. She wasn't identified until the 12th of September. So on the 11th of September, there were some fishermen going around the harbour, and in the harbour they found a purse, and police had a look through the purse and they found that it belonged to 50-year-old Catherine Medina. So police tracked down her husband and they get him in to look at the body of Jane Doe 52, and he positively identifies the body as that of his wife, 50-year-old Catherine Medina. Police obviously ask him questions about, you know, when the last time he saw her was, if there was any information he could give them that would help them solve who would have wanted to murder her, and he says that the last time he saw her was on the 18th of August, so the day before her body was discovered. They had been out at a bar in San Pedro together, and they'd actually gotten into a fight, and she'd left the bar. he'd gone out, followed her out of the bar, and she had hailed a cab by herself. And inside that cab was, like, the driver was just a man, a random man. And she got in that cab and he never saw her again. On the 4th of September in 1974, a third body was found, and this body was actually found just 2 miles away from where Catherine Medina's body was found. So 54-year-old Anna Felch also lived in San Pedro, and she worked at a hot dog stand on Cabrillo Beach. And on the 3rd of September, she had gone out to a local bar for some drinks, and she was seen leaving the bar at 1:30 a.m. The next morning at 7:30 a.m., some construction workers found her body at a construction site, which was just a few blocks away from her house. Just like the previous 2 victims, she had been raped and then manually strangled to death, and there were also some reports that her body was found bound. And it was determined that she had only been dead for about 3 to 4 hours when her body was found. So police spoke to some of her friends and family, and some of her friends said that apparently some guy had been bothering her a few days before her death, but other than that, there were no leads, there was no other evidence, and so once again the case went cold. And actually by this point, none of these murders had been linked at all, despite the obvious similarities of all of these women having been in San Pedro in the same area. They were all middle-aged women, they had all been strangled to death, and they had all been raped, and they actually all were described as heavy drinkers or alcoholics who often hit the bars in San Pedro. And then a few months later, in March of 1975, another body was found. 60-year-old Leah Griffin had just gone out for a drink in a local bar in San Francisco because she had actually just found out that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. So in March of 1975, she was staying in a residential hotel in San Francisco, and her body was found inside her room by one of the housekeepers. She had been bound, raped, and manually strangled to death just like the other 3 victims, and also just like the other 3 victims, she was a middle-aged woman who liked to have a drink and frequented bars. Again though, without any evidence or any further leads about who may have done this, the case went cold for a very long time. I mean, there were some people who were interviewed and stuff like that in the following years, but no suspects or anything like that until 2002, so 30 years after the first murder. So in 2002, police get a call from this woman named Renee Laudenberg, and she says, hey, my father-in-law Adolf Laudenberg just told me that he raped and murdered 4 women. Like, they were just in the car, you know, and he was this like sweet 77-year-old man, you know, he babysat her kids, got ice cream for her kids, he was this cute little grandpa, and they're driving in the car and he just randomly turns to her out of the blue and goes, I've raped and murdered 4 women in my lifetime. I'm sorry? Come again? Just like that. Like it was the most casual thing ever. And Renee is just like, hold on a minute, dude, what the f? And she's like, you know, did I hear that correctly? Can you just repeat what you said? And he repeats himself and he says, I raped and murdered 4 women in my lifetime. And he tells her it was 3 women in San Pedro and 1 woman in San Francisco, and he had strangled them all to death. He described these murders as his 4 sins, and he said that he had murdered them because they all had some sort of quality about them that reminded him of his ex-wife. And she was obviously shocked. She was in shock. I mean, she had divorced his son by this point, but she still kept in contact with him because obviously she and Adolf's son had had children together. He was their grandfather, so she kept in touch with Adolf. He was this cute little old man. He babysat the kids. He took them to school. He took them to go get ice cream. Like, she was just shocked. But she calls the police, and police obviously look into it, and they find while looking into it that 27 years earlier, another woman, and actually another one of Adolf's daughter-in-laws named Jean, had actually reported the exact same thing. And these are different women. They don't know each other. They live on opposite sides of the country, and 27 years apart, they had both reported that their father-in-law, Adolf Laudenberg, had told them that he had murdered and raped 4 women. So basically, back in the summer of 1975, Jean was a college student and she had met this guy named Steve Laudenberg. Things were getting pretty serious, and so she was moving from Pittsburgh to San Luis Obispo, where she and Steve were going to get an apartment together. Steve was actually going to get to San Luis Obispo a little bit after Jean got in, so he organized for his stepfather, Adolf Laudenberg, to go and pick Jean up from the airport and help her out, you know, help help her with the moving process, and things were going really great. They were getting along really well. They would go to flea markets together. He would pick her up and take her apartment hunting and shopping for her apartment, and helped her get ready for Steve's arrival. Like, he was like this elderly father figure to her. But then, unfortunately, things start getting a little weird, and he starts kind of coming onto her. He's writing her love letters. He's leaving little love notes on her car windshield and basically confessing his undying love for her, his stepson's soon-to-be wife, you know? Like, this is her boyfriend's stepfather. I can't even imagine how uncomfortable I would be. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Susan Powell case, actually. Like, if you guys have seen my video on that, I'll link it down below, but her stepfather is a creep. So then one day, a few days before Steve arrives, Jean and Adolf are driving in the car together, going to look at some things for the apartment, get things ready, and he just turns to her like it's the most casual thing in the world and says, yeah, I murdered 4 women in my lifetime, 3 in San Pedro, 1 in San Francisco, and I raped them all and I strangled them all to death. And Jean was like, what the hell? I mean, she had no idea what to do. She didn't even know if she should believe him or not, like if it was a true story or not, but she was super uncomfortable. Like, that mixed with the fact that he like kept trying to come onto her, she was so uncomfortable, obviously. I mean, that is just odd. So she basically just avoided him like the plague for the next few days until Steve arrived. Like, she didn't want to be in her apartment because obviously Adolf knew where she lived. She would go to the library all the time during the day so that she didn't have to bump into him. And then when Steve arrives, she immediately tells him like, hey, your stepdad just told me that he murdered and raped 4 women to death. What the hell? Like, what is going on? Steve is also like, what the hell? And he 100% believes Jean. He's 100% on Jean's side. So they immediately go to the San Luis Obispo police station and they report everything to them, everything that Adolf had said. And the police just straight up didn't believe them. I mean, they did alert the LAPD and they did go and have a chat to Adolf, but obviously Adolf denied everything and he was really friendly and very, you know, forthright. So they were like, yeah, nah, this nice old man couldn't have done anything like that. You guys, you know, calm down a little bit, right? And that was that. The case just went cold for the next 27 years until 2002 when Renee came forward with the exact same story. So then when she came forward and police looked into the file and saw Jean's report from 27 years earlier, they were like, okay, well, maybe there actually is something to this. Maybe we could have solved these murders 27 years ago. So they asked Renee to do a taped phone recording with Adolf, basically trying to get him to admit to the murders again, except this time on recording, and he was like super vague the entire time. I couldn't find an actual recording for the call, but I will read you a little snippet of what was said. So Renee said, you know, you dropped a bomb on me, Grandpa, and I haven't had anyone to talk to for days, and I'm kind of going to explode here, you know? Are you like, you know, sorry for what you did? And he replied, I've took all my problems to the Lord. And he pretty much did that for the whole call. So she would like try and gently nudge him towards admitting to the whole thing again, like saying, I raped and murdered 4 women again. But he pretty much just kept saying like, all my problems are saved by the Lord and, you know, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So the call, you know, didn't really help police at all, but now Adolf was definitely their prime suspect in the case. So they start looking into the case files and they find out that LAPD had actually lost all of the DNA samples. So you know how there was obviously semen found in every single one of these victims and that semen was collected for DNA evidence. LAPD detectives had lost it and it had all been destroyed. But luckily, they actually managed to find 1 slide of DNA evidence, the semen that was found inside Lois Petrie at her murder. It was found in a drawer at the coroner's office. So not at LAPD, they got rid of everything, but just in a back drawer somewhere in the coroner's office, there was 1 slide of DNA left from the Lois Petrie murder. But by this point, they didn't have a DNA profile for Adolf because he had actually never been in trouble with the law before, so he had never had to give evidence or DNA or fingerprints or anything like that. So police are brainstorming, they're thinking, okay, how are we going to get this guy's DNA? So they decide that they're going to get an LAPD officer to go undercover and go and ask Adolf if he wants to get some coffee to talk about some burglaries of some motor vehicles that have been happening in the area. Which, I mean, the thing I don't understand about this is that why would you want an undercover officer to talk about something like that. Wouldn't you just want, like, isn't it weird for just like some random person to come up to you and be like, hey, let's go get coffee so we can talk about some burglaries of some motor vehicles that have been happening in the area? I would be like, get away from me, you freak. But if it was a cop, I feel like I would be more obliged to go and talk to them about these burglaries, right? I don't know. I just thought that was weird. Maybe I'm missing something here. So over the next 3 or so months, they tried to locate Adolf, and he lived in this old white camper van. So they went around the San Pedro and the Santa Monica area, and they would basically ask people who lived in camper vans and who lived a more transient lifestyle if they had seen him, and they took a photo of him around being like, you know, have you seen this guy? And then after about 3 months, they talked to this one woman who's like, actually, yeah, I have seen his camper van. So the cop gives her his card, and he's like, you know, call me if you see his camper van again, or if you happen to see him around. And then about 30 minutes later, he gets a call, and it's actually from Adolf Laudenberg himself. So this woman had gotten Adolf to call this guy, or this undercover police officer, and he agreed to go and get coffee with the undercover officer. So shortly after, Adolf and this undercover officer go and meet up at this local donut shop for coffee. It was, you know, at this place Adolf had suggested. And the undercover officer is like, look, I wanted to talk to you about some motor vehicle burglaries that had been happening in the area. And then Adolf goes, oh, I thought you were actually here to question me about some murders that happened in San Pedro back in the 70s. And the undercover officer is just like, gigs up. But then somehow, I don't know how, but he manages to recover and get the conversation back to normal. Back to the, you know, motor vehicle burglaries that had been happening in the area. After a while, when the conversation is over, Adolf gets up and he leaves the donut shop, and he leaves his coffee cup that he had been sipping on the table, and another officer swoops in, grabs that coffee cup, bags it for evidence. I don't know why they needed a second officer to do it, because Adolf had left. It's not like they had to keep up the guys that this guy was undercover. But they send the coffee cup off to be tested, and 2 months later, they get the results back, and Adolf's DNA is an exact match to the semen that was found inside Lois Petrie back in 1972. He is the killer. Okay, so let me tell you guys a little bit about Adolf. He was born in 1926 in Lexington, Kentucky. His father had immigrated to the US from Germany and worked as a butcher, and his mother had died when he was super young. He got into whittling walking canes. It was a hobby that he was really into, and he would make these canes from salvage wood that he would find, you know, from garbage cans, or wood that he would find from manzanita scrub, and he would spend a long time like intricately carving these canes. He would carve birds into the handles and things like that, and he was actually featured in the LA Times for his work. And here's a little quote of what Adolf said in this LA Times article. He said, "You can lean on it, take the weight off for a little while, and a lot of people, when they walk, they have dogs bothering them, and they can use a stick to wave them off. And if someone tries to rob you, you got protection. I love making them, and I love seeing them in people's hands, so I sell them cheap." So he would give the canes away, or he would sell them for like no more than $10. Eventually, when he was old enough, he enlisted in the Navy, and when he was 18, he was serving in Trinidad in 1944, which is where he met his future wife, Annelle. They got married, and Adolf ended up adopting Annelle's son, Steve, who I spoke about earlier, and they all moved to California together. Annelle worked in a dance studio there, and she was super outgoing. She didn't drink. She very much cared about her health, and at one point, she actually worked for Jack LaLanne, who was like a health guru, which I just thought was interesting. Adolf was pretty much the opposite in terms of personality. He was very introverted and withdrawn. He didn't like to dance, but he was a very friendly guy. People who knew him liked him. He was always willing to help anyone who needed it, and you know, he would give money to people who needed it. He got a job as a security guard, and he then went to work as a taxi driver, and eventually, after 30 years of marriage, Adolf and Annelle got divorced. Annelle didn't love him anymore, and she decided to become a stripper. Power to you, girl. So the divorce and all of that sort of thing is around the time the murders occurred, and he was still working as a cab driver, and basically what he would do is he would use his work as a cab driver to go around, driving around, looking for lonely, drunk, middle-aged women who reminded him of his ex-wife in some way, and he would pick them up, he would blindfold them, he would rape them, and he would then strangle them to death. And he actually later told investigators that he felt sorry for these women, that he felt like he was helping them out because they were poor and they were sick and they were into drinking alcohol. You know, he was doing them a favor in his mind. And then after the murders, Adolf moved to New Orleans, he remarried, and then after a few years he moved back to San Pedro, where he met Jean and was helping Jean move into an apartment with his stepson Steve, and he confessed to the murders, and you know the rest of the story. So after they had his DNA, and his DNA was an exact match to the semen found in Lois Petrie's body, he was arrested on the 5th of September in 2002, and his bail was set at $1 million. His trial began in 2006, and he pled not guilty. He basically denied everything, even though they had his DNA and his two daughter-in-laws saying that he had confessed to them. But because he denied everything, they could only arrest him for the murder of Lois Petrie because it was the only case they had DNA evidence for. They couldn't charge him for any of the other murders. But he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Lois Petrie. Lois's son was notified of this, and he said that he had always hoped that DNA would one day solve his mother's murder. So a bit of a bittersweet moment. Unfortunately, while detectives did continue to investigate the other three murders of Catherine Medina, Anna Felch, and Leah Griffin, they were never able to gather enough evidence to try him for their crimes. There has also been speculation that he was responsible for two more murders. 55-year-old Irene Hind lived in San Francisco. She owned her own bar there, and she was known as a very friendly, warm woman who was always willing to help out those in need, those who frequented her bar. And on the 12th of March in 1974, her body was found in the hallway of her bar, and she had been raped and strangled to death. The last murder he's believed to have been responsible for was that of 83-year-old Maud Burgess. She was a retiree who had been helping with the management of her apartment building in San Francisco, and she was described as a very small and frail woman, and she had been living in her same apartment for the last 12 years, and she very rarely left the apartment. She left twice a month to go to her hair salon. I'm sure she left to go and do like grocery shopping, but other than that, she very rarely left, especially at night. In November of 1974, she was found by her building manager after one of her neighbors complained about the noise coming from her apartment, because obviously the killer had come in, and when they had murdered her, they had put the radio on and they had left it on, so it had just been playing really loudly for the past couple of days until somebody reported it, and that's when her building manager found her. She was found naked and lying face down on her bed. The bed had been stripped and the sheets had been torn into little pieces that were used to tie her to the bed. She was found with a bandana around her throat, which had been used to strangle her, and a pillowcase over her head. And she had been raped and then strangled to death. The apartment had been ransacked, but there was no sign of a break-in, so it was theorized that she either knew the person that had killed her or she had let them in willingly. There was also a fingerprint found at the scene that didn't match Adolf Laudenberg's fingerprints. But that is everything from me. That's everything for this case. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think? Do you think he was involved in the last two murders? Personally, I definitely don't think he was involved in Maud's murder because one, the fingerprint didn't match him that was found in the apartment. Two, it wasn't really his MO. He manually strangled people. He didn't strangle them with bandanas. He killed women that reminded him of his ex-wife and people who drank a lot and went to bars a lot, and doesn't really seem like that was the case. It was just a very different murder scene overall. And I'm not sure what I think about the murder of Irene. I mean, I think it's weird that he only admitted to 4 murders. I feel like if he murdered 5 people, he would have just admitted that he killed 5 people. So personally, I kind of don't think he was responsible for the last 2 murders at all, but I would love to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I will see you in my next video tomorrow. Bye guys!